Well, thank you so much. How is the volume? Can people hear me? Okay. So I'm very honored and grateful to be here to speak on such an important subject. I want to thank first Circle, our South Yuba River Citizens League. They have a booth over here waving at you. Thanks also goes out to Citizens Climate Lobby. They're committed to building the political will for the climate solutions that we all need. Mine Watch is, of course, here. They're sponsored by CEA Foundation in opposition to reopening the mine. If you're looking for yard signs, those are the people that you can visit over there. And Nevada County Climate Action Now also has their table here. They're dedicated to addressing global warming. So really excited that we have the type of community that has multiple groups and organizations all working together on this important issue, which today I'm going to talk about personal climate action. And what I mean by that is not necessarily just telling you what things to buy and who to vote for, because that's largely some of the messaging people are getting. I can't wait to shop our way out of this problem. Tell me what products to buy. And there will be some shopping involved to solving this issue. But really the main technology that I'm going to be talking about today and that really needs to be addressed is the technology between our ears and the technology right here. And until we really get upgrades and change that type of technology, we can vote and buy all the cool stuff we want. The problem still isn't necessarily going to solve itself. And I'm really excited personally to be here talking to the AAUW because women's equality, I believe, is at the absolute foundation of this problem. If you took half of humanity and didn't allow them to contribute to progress in any sort of meaningful way for 10,000 years, what else would you expect but a planet that is this out of balance? So thank you for being here. And I'm going to talk about the vital role that women play. It's absolutely crucial. If we don't have women's equality, we're not going to be able to solve climate change. So let me talk about the agenda really quick. Quick introduction about myself, and then we're going to go through the climate quiz that's on the table really quickly. Part one, I'm going to go through the basics of the climate science. Most people understand it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to quickly cover the past, the present, the future of the science and the math around this. But then I'm going to talk about the vital importance of personal climate action, why it is so important to fill the gap left by politics and business. And then, so if it's important, what can we do? And I'm going to encourage you to consider the lowest hanging fruit. Yes, EVs and solar systems are great, but there's a lot more that needs to be done and everything matters. Then we're going to go through the quiz results. I've timed myself on this talk and we'll probably skip the table breakouts. We'll just have a round robin group chat at the end. That dotted line there is to indicate that if you need to leave by 11 o'clock or so, once I'm done with part 3 and before the quiz results, that might be a time for you to check your phone and scram. Okay, so a little bit about me. I've been here for 25 years in Nevada County. The last quarter of a century, this has been my home. I have 2 children, 20-year-old daughter who lives here, 27-year-old son back east. They both graduated from high school here in Nevada County, Bitney Springs, and Nevada Union. And when I first moved here, I got hired at Sierra Solar System, $6.50 an hour answering phones, a whole new career for me. And within a few short years, I started Planet Solar, my own company. A few short years after that, we partnered with California Solar, who were great installers, but they weren't really savvy with sales and marketing, and that was my forte. It was during that time period that Peace Lutheran Church called me, and we installed a system that's up on that roof right now. The sunshine is powering this presentation as we speak. In 2011, the original owner of Sierra Solar sold it. The new owners and I began to have a discussion, and we decided to merge our companies, and I sold Planet Solar, was left the 5% owner, but we had 3 companies together. I gradually stepped away. It was clear that the new owners really needed to be given the freedom to do what they wanted to. And I started to help my friend's company, Sustainable Energy Group. They were voted last year's best solar company in Nevada County. Then I went to work for corporate, the manufacturer of solar panels. I was really excited. I'm in the corporate world. It wasn't that exciting. So I was excited when buyers invited me to be their first solar sales manager when they started their solar division. And then California Solar Electric Company eventually went back out on their own, and they invited me to be their commercial solar salesperson. So I've got solar systems on the Miners Foundry, Nevada Theater, churches, fire stations. Really enjoyed working with the community and getting to know everyone over the last 25 years, homes, businesses, and nonprofits. And as of 2021, I'm now on my own. And I discovered that I was actually getting a little bit tired of sales work. And to be honest, I was getting tired of working with all men most of the time. They tend to be combative, they tend to be competitive, and whether it was someone at PG&E, whether it was someone at the building department or other salespeople, I wanted to actually finally be on my own and focus more on climate action and being more cooperative and collaborative. Now, during this time period, I also started my radio show, The Energy Report. It's now turned into the Climate Report because everyone's familiar with where to get energy news and solar, but people are hungry for climate info. And I also have a daily news Facebook page that I just wanted to point out. My dear 77-year-old mother had said to me a couple of years ago, "You seem awfully busy. What can I do to help? You're doing a lot of volunteering." And I said, if you'd be willing to populate the Facebook page with news every single day. So the Facebook news page for the Climate Report, my 77-year-old mom in Denver every day, probably right now, is Googling headlines and puts news out there that's valuable for you. So, because there's a lot of clickbait. There's a lot of clickbait out there. So that's something that I'm grateful for. And then I started my Balance Beam podcast, which is shining a light on how to be more in balance. A lot of people, when they think about climate change, it's how can we fight, how can we stop, and it's really more about uniting and becoming more in balance. And our natural systems here, our operating system for the planet wants balance. There's day and night and cold and hot and high tide and low tide. So the lesson for us is if you're trying to figure out what do I need to do here, just remind yourself I need to figure out how to be more in balance with the planet. And then I recently was invited to do a monthly TV show on Nevada County Media where I'm interviewing people in the community like yourselves. I'm not interviewing authorities and talking heads that are lecturing and saying what you should do or what they're doing. It's just individuals and peers saying, I do care, and this is what I am doing. So I want to touch on the climate quiz really quickly. If you could, I'm going to run through this. You should have a quiz on your table with pencils. And don't think too much about it, just go with gut instinct. But let's run through these really quickly to make sure everyone has an opportunity to answer them. So on the first page, it says quiz on people. And I wanted to draw attention to an interesting ongoing study that Yale has been doing. They're interviewing, taking polls and surveys of Americans, and they're asking them their thoughts on climate change. And there are 6 different types of Americans that they have identified. And they're right here on the list on the first page. First is the dismissive. They're the people that know about climate change or hearing about it, but they believe it's a hoax. Then there are the doubtful. They've also heard about climate change, but they don't think it has anything to do with humans and it's just a natural process and not a big deal. So those two know about it, but they're kind of like, meh, not a big deal. Then there's the disengaged, people who actually don't ever hear about it, don't even know about it. It's not even on their radar. Next are the cautious. These are people who know about it, but they're not sure what the heck is going on. So those two, the disengaged and the cautious, I refer to them as I don't know. Those two people are the I don't know. I don't know because I've never even heard of it. I don't know because I've heard of it, but it's confusing. And then there's the last two, the concerned and the alarmed. The alarmed are the most engaged and see this as a serious, urgent threat. Concerned are also engaged and believe that this is a serious human-caused threat, but they believe that it's something that's going to be out in the future, so it's not really quite a priority for them. So those are the 6 Americans, and again, I think of them as really 3 groups. The first 2, I know about it and I don't care. The middle 2, I don't know, and then the other 2, I know about it and I really care. So then here's the first question. Question number 1, if you could answer for me by circling on your page, which category in the last poll that they did in September 2021, which of those 6 categories do you think represents the largest group of Americans? Out of those 6, is it the people who know about it but don't care? Is it the people who are confused? Or is it the people who know about it and really care? And within each of those, there are two different choices. So circle which one you think represents the largest group being polled. Question number 2, the dismissive, the people that are at the bottom about this, as far as I don't care and it's a hoax, what percentage do you think they polled at? And those 6 numbers aren't just arbitrary numbers I made up. Those 6 numbers do match up with the most recent poll results. So they are one of those numbers. Circle one of those if you would, please. Question number 3, as a percent of people surveyed, how many people as a percent do you think are in the alarmed category, the most engaged and concerned? Pick one of those numbers if you would, please. And then the last question, during the last 5 years of this survey, all of the categories actually shrank in number, but one doubled almost. All of them have been going down in number, except for one has doubled in just the last 5 years. Which one do you think that is? Okay, flip to the next page. We'll go through the next few questions. There's just four questions on perceptions. There are a lot of studies that are showing that Americans overwhelmingly care about this issue, but we think other people don't care about this issue. So let's talk about what your perceptions are. Let's go with question number 5 here. It says, what percent of Americans surveyed do you think support this suite of climate policies, funding clean energy research, regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, solar and EV tax rebates, and teaching it in schools, teaching about climate change in schools? In polling, all 4 of those land in one of those ranges of percent. So what do you think? Pick one of those answers. Is it 20 to 30% of Americans support all those? Is it somewhere in the middle, somewhere higher? The next question, question number 6. Circle your answer for what you think is the percentage of Americans surveyed that say they discuss global warming at least occasionally. What percentage of Americans say, yeah, I discuss it with family and friends at least occasionally? Pick one of those numbers. The next question is similar, but instead of how much are you discussing it, it's how much are you hearing about it in the media? What percentage of Americans do you think say that they hear about global warming at least once a week in the media? Circle one of those answers, please, and I'll have the results at the end. Question number 8. Research links youth psychological distress to government inaction on climate change. They did a survey of 10,000 teens and young adults around the world, 10 different countries, and there was a specific percentage of them that said they believe the future is frightening. What percentage do you think polled that? And then there's the last 4 here. This is a quiz on politics. We've signed the Paris Agreement and unsigned it and re-signed it. And then we also just recently passed a big climate legislation package at the end of last year. Put your answers down here for question number 9. What is our goal for the United States as a stated government goal? By the end of this decade, how much are we supposed to reduce our emissions compared to 2005? 10%, 20, 30, 40, 50? What is our goal for the end of this decade as far as a reduction of emissions? Question number 10, this most recent climate package is going to make a big leap forward on reaching that goal. How big of a leap forward? Is it going to get us 65% of the way there, 75, 85, 90, 100%? What do you think? Question number 11, signers of the Paris Climate Agreement are referred to as parties, signatories. And there's a conference of parties every single year, a COP. There was just COP26 last year. There's almost 200 countries who have signed it. So last year, this was signed in 2015. So 7 years on in 2022, how many countries are on track to meet their promises and obligations? Is it over half? Is it less than half? 16? 1? And then last question on the quiz that I'd appreciate if you could answer, based on all the current global pledges to date, which have a shared goal of limiting our warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, right now, taking everything together in the pledge department, what is the estimated average increase expected by the end of this century? And you've got some choices there. So if you could just quickly answer those, don't worry about it too much. We'll revisit them and I'll give you the answers at the end. Some of the answers you'll get as I talk. I also asked them to include a couple of news articles about a hot new topic that is creating political division, and it really doesn't necessarily need to. And so this is an article about gas stoves and the latest research on gas stoves and how polluting they are even when they are off. It is as if you have a smoker in your home. And there are now new rebates and incentives to switch to a new type of electric oven and stove that actually can work better than gas. And there's an article by a famous woman author saying how she fought against giving up her gas stove and now she loves her electric. So please read those. Okay, let's get started. Quick climate basics are past, present, and future. I might scooch through this a little bit fast because I'm assuming everyone's mostly aware. So when it comes to the past, one of the things that's worth noting, oh, I see, this doesn't really come up too well, does it? So let me just mention something then. What this is showing, whoops. Well, that won't work. What this is showing is the level of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is where we want to be. This was pre-industrial. This is the last decade. This is the last time that we lost all of the glaciers. And this is the last time we've had this much CO2 in the atmosphere. You'd have to go 3 million years back. And the reason that I mention this is there's a lot of concern from well-meaning people who say, isn't this natural cycles? Aren't there natural cycles of hot and cold? The answer is, yes, there are natural cycles of hot and cold. How do we know about that? Climate scientists. And they also say this isn't natural cycles of hot and cold. So the other interesting thing is that we haven't had this much CO2 in the air in 3 million years, and our natural cycles are 40,000 and 100,000 year increments. So our ice age coming in and out of ice ages is in tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. You will have to go back 3 million years before modern humans even existed. We've never experienced an atmosphere like this. And at that time, they saw the temperature in the atmosphere increase just like today. However, the other reason that we know that this isn't natural is normally when you have temperature increases like this, they take thousands of years. 3 million years ago, when we had this level of carbon dioxide and really high heating, it took 1,000 years in order to get 1 degree of heat. It took 5,000 years to heat up 5 degrees. We're doing that in about 100 years. And the science shows that when it went that fast, 1 degree per millennia, Earth's systems still struggled. So doing it in 100 years is what's really making an issue. I'm just going to click through these then because you can't really see the labels. Another interesting, what's that?
What was the last tower?
Oh, sorry. So on the far right is the future predictions. We don't know how thick we're going to choke the atmosphere. But what you can see is you'd have to go back 3 million years to find 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide. We just passed that within the last year or so. So now we've exceeded what we saw 3 million years ago. And on the low end, if we're lucky and we do what we need to, we might push ourselves up to 445 parts per million, or it could go off the charts to 1135, unknown. Thanks for asking. So then here's something that's interesting. In the last big international climate report, the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've been meeting since 1990. Oh, and you can't really see it too well here. I apologize. They just came out with their last report, the most recent one. Every few years, they revisit the research and they synthesize it and say, hey, everybody, yipes. And in 2021, they came out with their latest report, and they had an interesting graphic. Because I've spoken to some people that said, Martin, I remember when this first came out in the 1990s, and my understanding is we weren't really sure. There was a lot of uncertainty, and that is absolutely true. But what they showed is the level of change of the science and just how closely we're looking at this. And you can't really see it here, but the land surface temperature, the stations around the globe, we used to have only 1,800 places where we were taking measurements. We now have 40,000 different places taking measurements. Geological records, we had only built up a record that went back a few million years for CO2 and temperature and sea level. Now we go back tens and hundreds of millions of years. And then the The satellite remote sensors, you can't see it here, but in the 90s, they were only sensing a couple of different pieces of data. Now we have multiple data points. Once they realized, oh my gosh, we need a dashboard of the planet, we've been sending satellites up left and right for the last third of a century, measuring a lot more stuff. And so we can get a lot more granular measurements. This is now useless because it's kind of washed out, but you can see that there are a lot more little icons there showing what we're measuring with satellites. So bottom line, science is working really hard, and they've really well predicted what's happening and what's going to happen. So in the present, I want to show you, hopefully these will show up, they might not. I'm going to go through some screenshots from a really great web page at Bloomberg. A lot of people are saying, isn't this volcanic impacts? Isn't this sun cycles? Isn't this a natural occurring thing? So I'm going to walk you through some interesting charts that are going to show you isolated, well, what would volcanoes do? What would all of these different natural processes do to show this is people? So is it the Earth's orbit? And what they have here, this is 1880 to 2005. And the black line in every chart is the observed actual temperature that we've seen and as it's risen. And each one of these, they're going to have a separate line saying, what would the impact be on our temperature from each of these? So you can see with the Earth's orbit, it really wouldn't have much of an impact. Is it the sun? We know there are solar cycles. No, the sun wouldn't have much impact. I want to underscore that most of these natural cycles occur over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So if you looked at a chart in just a 100-year period, it's not really going to move much. Even if it's going up and down over millions of years, when you zoom in on this slice of time, it's really going to appear flat. So it's not the orbit, it's not the sun. Is it volcanoes? Actually, we should have been cooling if it was just volcanoes. Is it all three of these things combined? No. What about humans? We have a lot of impacts. Is it deforestation? That's the deforestation impact, roughly flat. Is it ozone pollution? Most of these you're going to see are flat. Is it aerosol pollution? That should actually cool the planet. So if anything, we would expect things to be cooling right now. But the impact of greenhouse gases would look like that. Just greenhouse gases alone without any of those other influences. So when you add in all of the other influences, it matches up completely, perfectly. It's greenhouse gases, and we've known that it's going to be greenhouse gases. Matter of fact, this chart is interesting. The really thick black line is actual temperatures recorded. That mess of spaghetti of all the other lines, those are the predictions from 1970, 1971, 75, 77, 81, 50 years ago. That's what they predicted would happen, and that's exactly what has happened. They know the past very well. They know the present very well. It behooves us to listen to the climate scientists. So, simply speaking, the green line along the bottom is if it was just natural influences on our climate. The red line is natural plus human influences, and the black line is what has actually happened. And along the left-hand axis, you can see it tops out at 2 degrees. We're about to pass the 1.5 degree threshold that we're not supposed to. I want to stop and talk about Eunice Newton-Foote. Does anyone have this book? Has anyone seen this book? Okay, sorry. It says All We Can Save. It is an amazing collection of women writers and poets put together by women all about climate change. And it says Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, a bunch of short essays. You might recognize some of the names: Katherine Hayhoe, Naomi Klein, Gina McCarthy, who Biden tapped to be our first domestic climate czar. Poets include Mary Oliver, Alice Walker. But there's something really fascinating here at the beginning. It talks about Eunice Newton-Foote. Rarely gets the credit she's due. In 1856, 25 years before this organization was founded, and right about the time that we were here settling this as European settlers, in 1856, Foote theorized that changes in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere could affect the Earth's temperature. She was the first woman in climate science. But history overlooked her until just a few years ago. Foote arrived at her breakthrough idea through experimentation. This is 1856. She took an air pump 2 glass cylinders, and 4 thermometers for her experiment. She tested the impact of carbon dioxide against common air. When placed in the sun, she found that the cylinder with carbon dioxide trapped more heat and stayed hot longer. From a simple experiment, she drew a profound conclusion, saying an atmosphere of that gas would give to our Earth a high temperature. And if, as some suppose, at one period in history, the air had mixed with it a larger proportion than at present, an increased temperature must have necessarily resulted. She was absolutely right. In other words, she connected the dots between carbon dioxide and planetary warming and did it more than 160 years ago. Now, Eunice Newton Foote's paper was called Circumstances Affecting the Heat of Sun's Rays, and it was presented in August 1856 at a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and then it was published. It's the first known publication in a scientific journal by a woman in physics. For unknown reasons, though, it was read aloud at the meeting by a man. Who knows why that reason would be? It was read aloud by Joseph Henry, Secretary of the Smithsonian, rather than by Foote herself. That was 3 years before John Tyndall, a physicist, published his own more detailed work on heat-trapping gases, work that's typically credited as the foundation of climate science. Did John Tyndall know about Foote's research? It's unclear, but he did have a paper on color blindness that was printed in the same 1856 issue as her paper. In any case, we have to wonder if Eunice Newton Foote ever found herself remarking, as so many women have, I literally just said that, dude. Eunice Newton Foote, first woman published for physics, first woman in climate science, first human on the planet to discover the issue that we're talking about. Women, very vitally important part of this. Okay, part 2, vital importance of climate action. Before I talk about the vital importance, I'm just going to show you some interesting and fun pictures to loosen you up and liven you up. If any of you have a Facebook account or on Facebook, you're familiar with memes. They're just pictures with captions that are funny, entertaining, and thought-provoking. I'm going to go through some. But first I'm going to start with a quote. Don't wait for someone else to play your part. Who said that? Me. I said that. I like that quote. I'm with her. Jane Goodall and Greta Thunberg, 2 powerhouses for the earth. Of course we need hope, but the one thing we need more than hope is action, because once we start to act, hope is everywhere. I love this. This is a climate scientist version of a protest sign. Climate Science 101. It's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, we can fix it. And then they have a whole bunch of scientific footnotes at the bottom of the protest sign. Carl Sagan, anything else you're interested in is not going to happen if you can't breathe the air and drink the water. Don't sit this one out. Do something. You are, by accident of fate, alive at an absolutely critical moment in the history of our planet. The future is reduced for quick sale, $2. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. To be honest, when I thought about this a century ago, it was more that we inherited it from our ancestors. The way we've been living the last century, we're not only borrowing it, we're taking it from our children. It's in our hands. Hands like rethink your choices, refuse single-use items, reduce consumption, reuse everything, refurbish old stuff, repair before you replace, repurpose, be creative, reinvent, and as your last option, recycle. If you're familiar with the fake news website, The Onion, they have hysterical satire headlines. This is one. It says, local woman just thinks flaming forest could find more peaceful way to protest climate change. Look at how pissed off she is. Climate change, a timeline. Climate change isn't real. Okay, climate change is real. We're just not convinced it's caused by humans. Oops. Holy cow. Your 3 homes, your body, your planet, your mind. Take proper care of them. Be balanced. 2 women staring at the laundry line. It dries the washing using the very latest technology, a combination of solar and wind power. A lot of our climate solutions are really just adopting what we were doing not that long ago. That's the beauty of this challenge. It's not like as a species, we're thousands or millions of years beyond when we used to do a lot ourselves. It was just 100 years ago. That's two 50-year-olds laid end to end. It's not that long ago. People think of 100 years as a long time ago. No, two 50-year-olds end to end, boom. It wasn't that long ago. The greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production. Climate change will manifest as a series of disasters viewed through phones with footage that gets closer and closer to where you live until you're the one filming it. Oh, this is fascinating. It might be hard to read. On the left-hand upper corner, in 2020, the UK National Office of Weather, they issued this warning that said by the middle of this century, in 2050, that's what a summer weather forecast would look like for England. That is in Celsius. To put that in Fahrenheit, that's over 100 degrees. 100 to 104 degrees. They were warning people, in 2050 it's going to be that bad. The upper right-hand corner was an actual weather forecast from last year that was matching that. What they were saying was going to happen in 2050 is already happening now. And just spoiler alert, 2050 sounds like a long way away. We're already halfway there. We're practically halfway there. One frog says to another, relax, pot temperatures have been going up and down for centuries. Scientists have again landed a spacecraft on a proverbial dime on a planet 40 million miles away that rotates at 241 meters per second, whatever a meter is. Think I'm going to trust them on this climate change stuff. I love the women have some of the best snappy comments on these memes. Could reporters stop asking if political leaders believe in climate change and start asking if they understand it instead? This is during the fire season when the skies are orange. Nothing quite like choking on the air under a blood red sky to get you excited about gradual market-based solutions to climate change. Boy, sure is infuriating watching the most powerful people in the world pretend they can do nothing about anything. I hate my government, but I live too comfortably to get motivated enough to do anything about it. Similar lines, who wants to change? Everybody. Who wants to change? I don't know. This is a shareholders meeting of an anonymous company, and so while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. Okay, let's get some positivity in here and some artwork. Destroy the patriarchy, not the planet. Yes. This is some of the best information that you could take home for climate action. Food. Buy it with thought, cook it with care, use less wheat and meat, buy local food, serve just enough, use what is left, don't waste it. U.S. federal government, 1917. That's how far we've come. Yeah, great information. Those unreliable gas cars. And this is what we're working to do. We're pushing back against a system that is gradually swallowing up everything. And the last one is resilience in action is the answer to climate doomism. Okay. So why is personal action so important? I want people to think of politicians as helpful in this fight, but they are more like our last responders. They tend to do things at the very end when they have to. It tends to be weak regulations that have loopholes and have really long lead times. We're appreciative of everything they do, but we are really the first responders. Business responds to what we do. Politicians respond to what business tells them to do. So as an example, this is global emissions over the last, you can't really see it, sorry, I apologize for that, but it goes back to 2016. And you can see that there's a dip when we had the pandemic. And there are several different lines here. The one that's going the lowest, that's where our emissions need to go in order to keep things at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1.2, and this is what the Earth is doing with all of the flooding and all of the droughts. This is where we need to go just to get it to 1.5. That's to make things worse than today. That's where we need to go. And then there's, if we keep it to 1.8, if we keep it to 2, the highest one is current policies. Business as usual is headed in the totally wrong direction. And then there are the pledges, and the pledges with conditions. That's as far as politicians are willing to go. There is a huge gap between what politics is able to do and where we need to go. That's our job. We're going to fill that gap. That was global emissions. This is the United States from 2005 going forward. And you can see there's a line in the middle that shows our target. Our 2030 target is to cut our emissions in half by the end of this decade. And I want to say something. That number can sound daunting. Cut 50% in a decade, that translates to 7% a year. If you just reduce what you're doing 7% a year, after 10 years, you've hit 50%. So that's the challenge, is just 7% less of everything that we're doing. And we're overdoing most everything. We're buying too much food, overcooking, overeating, throwing it away, leaving lights on, all that stuff. Focus on 7% less every year and we'll get there. The challenge now is we're a third of the way through this decade. So if you haven't started, that's more like 10%. But business as usual before this last political cycle was the dotted line up above. The lowest blue dotted line heading down the farthest, that's where we're supposed to be headed. That's our goal, to actually get to net zero at the middle of the century. The big bipartisan infrastructure law is the next dotted line down. We move the needle a smidgen, it's so cute. And then you might recall that we had something called the Build Better bill, and that the Build Back Better Act. And that was going to actually bring us really close to where we need to be. It's hard to see, but it's a green one. You might recall that Democratic Senator Joe Manchin said absolutely no way. And he wouldn't vote on it, and he finally got a bunch of concessions that turned into the Inflation Reduction Act, and it backed off a little bit. That's actually the impact of it. And this, a lot of people like to make this a partisan issue, but both of the major parties have problems when it comes to climate change. Joe Manchin accepts more fossil fuel subsidies, donations, than any other congressperson in the entire, whether the House of Representatives or the Senate. He gets more money from fossil fuels than anybody. And he also is a coal baron, as a lot of people know. So what he did, I know this is a busy slide, but stay with me for a second. On the right-hand side is the pie chart of what the Build Back Better Act was going to do. We need to get rid of all of the emissions in that pie chart. And it was going to reduce transportation emissions 19% in the green. Power was going to be cleaned up. That's 30% of our reduction. Industry, buildings, all of these things. It was still going to leave a gap, though. The politicians aren't willing to go the whole way there. They know what they need to do, and their answer is no. We know there's a fire on the 9th floor. We'll build you a ladder to the 7th. We have to get the rest of the distance. And look, we need to sympathize with them and understand that the people that are in place of business and politics, they've spent their whole lives working to get there. And they were given training to do nothing but run this system and grow it. They don't know how to do anything else. And we need to understand that that's a challenge for them. So what happened, though, after Joe Manchin, the coal baron, he was able to change it so that if you'll notice, every color stayed the same, but he was able to back off clean power a whole heck of a lot. And it's a total coincidence that his fortune comes from coal, total coincidence. But that created this even larger emissions gap. It will get our country 2/3 of the way there. That's our job. That's our job, to close that gap. We can't sit back and be like, great, they did it. Matter of fact, most everything that's in that bill requires personal action to actually achieve the results. They've laid out a bunch of incentives and rebates. You still have to act on them or nothing happens. So personal action is absolutely vital. And to underscore that this isn't a political party type of situation, you can see here when two oil men were in office, Bush and Cheney, our oil production in the United States actually was going down. Fracking took hold, Obama and Biden were in office, and you can see how much it jumped. They literally put their foot on the gas. Today's climate is as much owned by Joe Biden as anybody else. And then this is actually where we're trying to go. So the left-hand side of it, where it says 0C, that's where we were pre-industrial age. Where we are right now is 1.2. We're supposed to stop before 1.5. And then there's 4 scenarios at the bottom. The lowest one says current status quo. If we just keep doing what we're doing, we're headed towards almost 3 degrees of warming. And again, 1.2 is already catastrophic. 1.5 is bad. 2 isn't much worse. If we took into account all of the targets and the promises everyone has made, we're still going to get down to 2.1, 2.4. If we're really aggressive, best case, we're going to blow past 1.5 and get to 1.8. That's where politics is willing to go. And we love what they're doing and we appreciate what they're doing. And please pay attention to politics, make climate change an issue, but don't think that your personal climate action stops at the voting booth. That's where it starts. And then this is a very interesting quote from an article at the very end of the Wall Street Journal. Because I do news and climate news and energy news, I read a lot of news, every type of news possible. I don't just listen to one type of thing. If you wanted to know about an event in your neighborhood and you knew that one person gives you one version and one person gives you another, if you really wanted to know everything that happened, wouldn't you want to talk to everybody? So I listen to all of them. The most fascinating info is sometimes at the very end of news articles. One former regulator said the current situation related to energy reminds him of a period 5 decades ago, 50 years ago, when an Arab oil embargo and revolution in Iran led to a rethinking of energy policy in the US. But it's also different, he said. This is Bernard McNamee, a Republican former member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The crisis now is much worse than it was in the 70s. Why? Everyone is looking around and no one seems to know what to do. And that's because they haven't been trained to do what needs to be done. We can change quickly, but the titans at the top of industry and government, they're not built to change quickly. Okay, so here's why your personal action matters, because a lot of people think my personal action doesn't, my little contribution doesn't matter. It's one of the biggest reasons why people tend to be apathetic and don't do anything. What does one person matter? So let me run through a few metaphors and analogies to try and tickle your fancy. Number one, water versus fire. There's a great analogy that I heard from a contemporary of Martin Luther King. He was giving an interview, and he was being asked, why did you go through all of that suffering? You were being beaten up at lunch counters. Why would you do that? What was it going to accomplish? You're one little person in this one little town. And he said, dismissing that personal action is like this. It's like you're walking along the street, and you come across a house that's on fire. And you've never seen fire before. You don't know what to do, but you got a spray bottle. And you spritz it, pss, 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 and nothing happens. So you conclude water doesn't put out fire. When that's actually exactly what you need, more of it in the right direction with force. Water versus rock. You could go down to the river, sprinkle a little bit of water on a rock, nothing will happen. You'll conclude water can't touch rock. But you put enough water droplets together in the same direction, a long enough time, with enough force, you'll see those rocks disappear. And then this one's one of my favorites. I'm hoping that most everyone here, or everyone, is a voter and understands how important voting is. And most of us exhort people to please vote. Your vote matters. Every vote matters. I could guarantee that all of us in this room have never, ever once voted for a presidential candidate, congressional candidate, or a governor who has won or lost their election by one vote. So your vote didn't matter. It didn't matter. Mathematically, I can prove that your vote, sir, it didn't matter. You didn't have to vote. You could have slept in. The results would have been the same. You too, ma'am. All of us. I could tell each of you, your vote didn't matter. Because look at the results. That's silly, isn't it? Because the results are an aggregation of everyone's individual vote. So I can mathematically prove that your vote individually doesn't matter, and I can prove that mathematically your climate action matters. Everything you do that uses energy, there is a calculated mathematical impact. So why are we so obsessed with this and dismiss this? If climate action doesn't matter, neither does voting. And if voting matters, then climate action matters. Because the climate crisis is nothing but an aggregation of all of our choices. 7,300 versus 5. Over the next 20 years, that's really going to decide the future. Adult Americans have 5 days that we get to vote for president over that 20-year period. 5 days we get to vote for president. There's 7,300 days in that period where you're not voting for president, where you're making choices all day long. Which of those two numbers do you believe will have more of an impact on where the future is going to be in 20 years? Those 5 days that you vote, or the 7,300 days that you're making choices all day long. The middle slice, this is an important one to me. Personal climate action matters because right now we're very stratified economically as a society. There are people at the bottom that are struggling to survive. They don't have the ability or an incentive to even act on the climate crisis. Matter of fact, research shows they don't need to. The poorest of the poor are living a very climate neutral life. They're not flying and driving and doing the types of things the rest of us do. Then there is a slice at the top, very wealthy. And while the people at the bottom are going to feel the impacts of the climate first and worst, the people at the top are going to feel it last and the least. And they're the ones that are actually being taken care of by today's system, so they don't have an incentive to really act. And these people aren't acting. It's us in the middle. The middle slice needs to act. It's like that steamroller. It's like humanity. There's people at the back, the wealthiest, are running a steamroller over us, and it's taking the poorest first. In the middle, we have to push back against that. So personal action in the middle is vitally important. Don't sit back and think, oh, there's going to be some rich people that are going to fix this for us. It's going to be us. Dollar votes, everyone understands the power of voting with your dollar. They count those ballots religiously. And those polls are open 24/7. And they matter. For example, 20, 25 years ago, if I wanted to find organic food in a town, I had to figure out where the little tiny co-op was in the industrial section where there's some guy named Beaver that's selling stuff out of the back of his pickup. Now, the largest seller of organic fruits and vegetables in America is Walmart. They didn't do it because they like hugging trees. They did it because they like hugging profits. And that's where we began voting with our dollars. And they said, where did they go? Give them that. Businesses will not sell stuff if we don't buy it. So it's not what they're selling, it's what you're buying. Ring around the earth. This is one that I like as well. Picture 8 billion of us humans as a ring around the earth, like a ring around Saturn, shoulder to shoulder. You've got one person on your left, one person on your right, and it goes all the way around the planet. The person on the total opposite side of the planet, that represents the person that's the complete opposite of you. We're looking at the same thing, seeing complete different perspectives. You could never convince them what you're seeing because they're seeing something different. And if you're focusing on changing their minds, you're going to be frustrated and might give up. But if you focus on changing these people's minds, they're the most able to be influenced by you. And then they'll influence those people. And before you know it, what you've been doing is finally influencing the person over there. Research shows that when it comes to choices about the energy and the environment, two things typically dominate: cost and convenience. If it's really expensive and inconvenient, we're not going to do it. Unless one thing overcomes that. Study after study shows peer influence beats them all. And an example of that is, imagine that a brand new fancy restaurant opens up and it's way far out of town. The little town of Washington, if you're familiar with that is. Let's say it's way out there and then 15 minutes down another dirt road, and the ads make it look like it's exorbitantly expensive. You're not in a big hurry to go out there. But over the next month, your 3 closest friends come to you and say, have you been to the new place? It is amazing, you have to go. Guess where you're going for dinner next? And then lastly, women. So important. As I said, this is the biggest deal. This is, I believe, a large reason why we have this crisis. You lock away for 10,000 years half of humanity. What do you expect? We're living in a world, like everything that you look around was generally created, inspired by, thought of by men. This microphone's probably designed by a man. The company that got the materials out of the ground, probably owned by a man. The men that got the materials, that's men. The people that sold it to you, men. The business that was selling the microphones, the paint, all of this. We're walking through a 3D rendering of the imagination of men from the past. And we can imagine something different. And what I tell men is, imagine if the opposite was true. Imagine if we, for 10,000 years, weren't allowed to do anything. No of the inventions. Yeah. It's coming, it's coming. None of the inventions were created. Louis Pasteur didn't invent anything, Edison, Einstein, none of those inventions. And instead, women were in charge. There would be a lot of improvements, but it would honestly still be out of balance in a different direction. Who knows what we've lost in the last 10,000 years in those inventions that we never got? And I believe that we absolutely need women's equality immediately. Matter of fact, I'm a proponent of going the other direction. And when I suggest that to men, you mean women being more in charge? Yeah, I don't like the sound of that. Really, because that's how it is today, in your favor. Yeah. So this is so important to me to talk to this group, because even studies show that climate emissions come more from men than women. 16% more than women, because men tend to drink, smoke, and fire up engines. We love engines and vehicles. And so it's just a thing. So we really need women's equality immediately, and we need all hands on deck. Yeah. Okay. Then to underscore that, thank you. Yeah. Remember the CNN climate quiz? Some of you may have gotten this. Refer to an email from Susie Monnery Wilson. Is Susie here? I haven't met her, but I was forwarded an email that came from her from April 27th. And it was a CNN climate quiz that said, hey, let's test to see if you know what really has the most impact. They asked about energy, they asked about transportation, they asked about food, and you were supposed to guess which has more of an impact than others. And they even had a section on empowering women. It warmed my heart. Empowering women, these would be the impacts on the climate. You hardly hear it. It's a big deal to me. We've got to have this. And if you took that quiz, what you discovered was the number one thing that would make the most difference is to fix the emissions related to our refrigeration. Refrigeration and air conditioning, it would be the equivalent of removing 723 million cars. Next largest impact was wasting less food. Let me take a step back. Right now, about 40% of the food grown on the planet in the US is wasted, totally wasted. All of the energy it took to plant it, harvest it, grow it, produce it, process it, bring it to wherever, all of that is wasted energy. It's absolutely enormous. Next is plant-heavy diet. This is one of the biggest and easiest things that you could do to reduce your climate emissions. And the things I'm talking about don't cost a lot of money. It doesn't take financing, it doesn't take technology, it doesn't take Elon Musk. It just takes your willingness to realize there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that makes a huge difference. Plant-heavy diet. Notice they don't say vegan or vegetarian. You can still eat meat, just minimize it as much as possible. And then the next biggest impact was greener stoves, getting away from the polluting stoves. What I did, though, was I went to the Empowering Women section of the quiz. And in each section, again, they had multiple questions about it. They had questions about educating girls and family planning, more gender equity in small farming. You heard about that talk, the woman from Nepal that's going to talk about their experience. What I decided to do was add all three of those things up in the Empower Women category to see how they compared. 845 million cars removed. It's the number one thing. Empowering women. It's right there. What I also thought was interesting was when I looked at those four other things, that represents the entire meal process. How you store your food, how you eat it, what you eat, how you cook it. The entire meal process, food buying, storing, and preparing, which oftentimes women still have a large hand in for any home. There it is. Women are the solution to this issue in so many ways. It's right.
You just weren't listening.
I'm mansplaining to you guys, come on. Okay, so lastly, what can we do? It's about 10 after 11. I apologize, I'm going a little long if anyone needs to scram. But now I'm going to give you some choices on what to do, and then we'll give you an answer to the quiz. I like to give people easy things to remember. And again, this isn't just a list of things to buy. Hey, go buy this, 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 you're good. Every single one of us is different. We all wake up at the beginning of the day and walk our own separate maze through life, and then we go to bed. And you're going to encounter different things as you go. And that's why I don't like to just give you a list of things to buy, especially because it's not just about buying things. So this is one of my favorite acronyms. It's PEACE, P-E-A-C-E. Remember PEACE. It stands for Practice Energy Awareness, Conservation, and Efficiency in that chronological order. Begin new habits and start small. Pick items and practice with grace. What I mean by that is this is like going on a diet. And we know that if you go too hard, too strong, and set goals that are too hard to achieve, it's easy to give up, and then just vacillate between hardcore and I'm in my bed with ice cream. And so practice it with grace. Yeah. Make sure that you recognize that it takes time, especially because our culture is pushing against you. And I sort of say, think of it like you're standing in the river, and if the river current is pushing you one direction, you've got to lean against it in order to stand up straight. So practice with grace and give yourself some wiggle room. Make this practice about energy of all types. When you're using water, electricity, gasoline, heat. And the first step is awareness. Raise awareness of when, how, and why you use energy every day. Oh, look, I'm turning this light on. Do I need to have it on? Do I not need to have it on? Conservation is different than efficiency. Conservation means not using it. Second guess when you're using something and don't use energy unless it's really necessary. Wow, I've got 10 lights on in this room. I really only need 2. That's conservation, not consuming and doing something. Efficiency is different. Efficiency is realizing I do need to turn the light on. It's dark. So make sure that you use as little energy as short as possible. Efficiency is making the most out of the least amount of work. So practice energy awareness, conservation, and efficiency. Peace. Begin practicing it, being more aware. When are you using it? How are you using it? I don't need to use that. I do need to use that, so am I being efficient in my use? Do that, we're going to make a difference. Practice energy efficiency, awareness, conservation, and efficiency. And remember, our appetites drive vehicles around the world. A lot of people say, well, I don't drive that much. There's only so much I can do as far as gasoline use. Our appetites are like remote controls. And we are making vehicles drive around the planet at a moment's notice. I would like something from Argentina, Mr. Amazon, boop. You can now shop at home. You don't even have to get up or put on pants. And it used to be something you have to get up and look nice and go shop at your local market. So you need to make sure that that awareness is not just what am I doing, but what am I doing that's making other puppets dance. This is another one, bullseye. Thinking about your life and your consumption habits as a bullseye, you in the middle and concentric circles around it. So first start with self-made. After reducing your consumption as much as possible, 7% a year, next produce whatever you can. Food, energy, entertainment, what have you. If you can't produce it, what can your neighbors help supply for you? If your neighbors can't, you can literally buy everything local. A lot of people say, I would love to buy local, but we don't have a TV factory. We don't manufacture cars here. We don't manufacture sofas here. There's only so much we manufacture here locally. I'd like you to think differently. We make everything here as long as you're okay with really good conditions secondhand. We make used cars here. We make used televisions here, used sofa, everything that you could possibly want. We're a very wealthy community in many regards. So buy local, thinking secondhand. We make everything here local. Then if we can't get it locally, try to restrict your purchases outside our community, but stay within the region if possible. And then lastly, if you have to go beyond way out there, make it crucial and important. That shouldn't be your first choice, jumping to the outside ring and bringing everything in. Start thinking about the bullseye. And you don't have to be rigid. Just say, okay, can I make this? No. Can I get it here? Okay. And walk yourself out there. But don't run out there and ignore all the other rings in between. Okay, and then these are some key areas of focus. Reducing meat intake. And again, this isn't a strident, extreme position. It's not quit eating all meats. It's begin reducing your meat intake. Red meat is the singularly worst food that humans could eat for the climate. Beyond plants, beyond any other meat, it's the hardest one on the planet. And studies show that it doesn't matter if it was one cow nearby, a small local lot, or a giant feedlot. The transportation related to the cow meat is a minimum amount of the emissions associated with it. It's mostly the cow itself. Lamb is next worst, pork is next, then chicken is better, seafood is lowest, plants are the best. So the important thing is it's kind of like we're up on this ladder climbing too high and we need to start climbing back down. So just begin introducing lower impact foods into your diet. Minimizing is the key. Again, not trying to be an extreme, be balanced. And begin exploring and adding replacements. I know some people that say, okay, I'm stopping eating meat. What else can I eat? And then they get so hungry, they didn't prepare for what the alternatives are, that they find themselves swinging right back into meat. So begin exploring what else is out there. There are a lot of alternatives. Some of them are gross and disgusting. Some of them are delicious. And what some people think is gross, someone thinks is delicious, and vice versa. So it's growing. There are more and more alternatives every single day. I was just at Raley's yesterday, and I got a pizza that had fake chicken meat on it. And I'd never seen it before. I'm excited about that. Limit red meat to once a week is one of the suggestions. You can eat all the other meats too, but when it comes to red meat, try and really limit that. And then transporting yourself. I talked about making other people move around, but here are some things. Research shows fly as little as possible, and they've discovered that a lot of short trips is harder on the climate than one long trip. So fewer connections, fly as little as possible. And again, it's not never fly and don't, it's just try and minimize it. EVs are cheaper than gas cars to own. This is a huge one. And I want to explain what I'm saying here. If you went out and shopped for an electric vehicle, an electric version compared to its gas counterpart, it's almost always $10,000 more expensive on the sticker price. Now, news media likes to say the average EV is $60,000, $70,000. That's the average. That leads people to think that that's what they cost. The average home sale in Nevada County is still around $500,000. Does that mean that all homes are $500,000? No. So if you look at cars, trucks, sedans, luxury, the price premium at the lot is about $10,000 no matter what you get. There is a $7,500 federal tax credit that almost completely gets rid of that difference. There are oftentimes state rebates around the country that can help further make the difference. What's important to know is 85% of Americans finance a car. People are not paying cash. And when you have that $10,000 difference offset by $7,500 tax credit, the monthly financing price is pretty similar. But what's important is once you start driving an electric vehicle, they are noticeably cheaper to operate once you have them. So if you have a choice of buying a new car, it is actually cheaper to buy, own, and operate an EV versus a gas car, month by month. It is true that it's harder on the environment to manufacture an EV. That is true. So if cars were designed to just be sculpture that sat in your lawn, then don't get an EV. But these are by definition vehicles being driven. And within 1 to 2 years, they begin to offset and overdo what gas cars do as far as emissions, and it's a net savings. So they're cheaper and they're better for the environment. Don't drive around parking lots. This is one where we're trained to go right to the front door and then hover around like a helicopter until we can get something close. Who doesn't need a nice brisk walk? It's good for our health, it's good for the environment. So I'd encourage you when you go to a shopping center, pull right in and park and then walk the rest of the way in. All of these things add up and matter. This is a big one to me. Walk outside as much as possible. Seems simple, but I want to describe to you something about it that really makes it that much more important for climate action. When we are inside buildings and homes, we demand control over the lighting conditions, the temperature, the volume. We tend to buy and consume more of everything. When we're out there, that is the lowest carbon emitting state of being that we could be. Because who's in charge of the lighting? Nature. Who's in charge of temperature? Nature. And we make do. Who's in charge of the volume? Nature. So spending as much time outside will make you emit much less carbon than just being inside. But more importantly, we need to re-foster an engagement and relationship with nature. Our society demands that we ignore it and treat it like a commodity. Between here and your home, you're going to get in a vehicle and drive through the outside, but where do your eyes have to be? On vehicles and signs and screens. It's almost like don't pay attention to nature. So walk outside as much as you possibly can, and you will love nature and get to know it that much more better and will care about it. Take good care of your vehicle and keep it. Don't get rid of a gas car just because you're excited about an EV. The best thing for the climate is to keep the one you have. Just buying more and more things isn't the solution. And so take care of your vehicle, keep it as long as possible, and then when it's time to buy a new vehicle, consider the options. And then drive smart. This means knowing that you might have a great vehicle, but how you drive it makes a big difference. Did you know that if you're driving less than 50 miles an hour, it's more efficient to have your windows down? But once you get over 50 miles an hour, it's more efficient to turn your AC on because of the drag on the vehicle. Those are subtle differences. Jackrabbit starting and stopping and racing around. This is one where I remind people being personally in balance is climate action. Because when we are emotionally out of balance, upset, sad, angry, we tend to leave later, drive faster, be in a hurry, jackrabbit start and stop. When we're emotionally upset, we tend to buy more stuff that we don't need. We tend to overconsume and waste it. We are harder on the environment when we're out of balance. So if you can focus on being more in balance, that's personal climate action. You'll be driving calmer when you get places. And then lastly, carpooling to events. I love this example of why it's not just technology that's going to take care of this issue, it's our thinking and our habits. Imagine that there's a concert or event down in Sacramento, and you're driving along on I-80, and you see this one guy, he's in his hybrid, he's really smug because he's driving a hybrid. And then he sees an SUV pass him headed to the same place, and he's like, those jerks, look at them with their big SUV. However, there's 5 people in that SUV headed to the concert. He's alone. He's got his big clamshell storage container empty on top. He's got a bunch of heavy stuff in the back, and he hasn't been taking care of his vehicle. That's actually the less efficient person. It's not just technology. It's who we are and how we use it. So how we get there? If we want the world to be different, it doesn't just get delivered different to our doorstep. You have to think different. You have to act different. You have to speak differently. So being more aware, staying positive, staying balanced. It gets easier and more fun. That's one of the most interesting things. Taking personal climate action tends to save you money, make you happier, make you healthier. And once you start a new practice and habit, it becomes easier. And you find more things and fun things to do. So get started. It's not something that you're going to regret. Acting different, practicing new habits, use a fun perspective like a game or a scavenger hunt. I was raised on video games when I was a kid. And so I like to sometimes think of it as when I wake up and I go through my maze of the day, where are the climate gems that I can collect? I want the coins. Where can I? No, sir, I don't need that straw. I'm really excited that I just collected that gem. So there's ways to make it more fun and interesting, like a game, as opposed to a morose, oh my gosh, we're all gonna die, I'm in a panic, I have to do everything immediately and have to warn everyone about it. Studies show that doesn't work for them or you. Think of it again like being on a diet. There was a great climate researcher that said, how we frame this is important. If you were opening a gym for people to be healthier, and you were doing an advertisement, would you have an advertisement of really miserable, sick people in the hospital? Or do you show them happy and doing their thing? So shining what you do and just setting a good example can be a big deal. And then consuming less, producing more, and no waste. There is no such thing as waste on this planet. It's a made-up concept by humans. We don't own this planet. We didn't build it, we don't operate it, but it comes with an operating system called nature. And nature focuses on balance and no such thing as waste. There is no such thing as waste here on this planet. And then talking different. This is a huge deal. Because again, most people care. The majority of Americans care about the climate, and the majority of Americans never talk about it because we're scared. It's one of those things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. You might upset people. Well, it turns out we're all thinking the same thing, and we all do really care. So you need to cultivate the ability to mention it. And what I mean by cultivating it is practicing not being alarmist and strident, but figuring out places where you can mention it. For example, when I'm out at a restaurant and I'm eating with some people and they say, hey, what are you going to get? You know, I'm trying to be a little bit more conscious of the climate, so I think I'm not going to get a meat thing and I'm going to get this. That's it. I didn't lecture anybody. I just explained what I was doing, just like if you're on a diet and you can inspire at the people at the table. I'm not going to eat this. I'm trying to lose some weight. Same thing. So it's practicing how to bring it up and when to bring it up in a way that makes it clear to everyone we need to talk about it. If in your family there was an abuser and everyone knew about it and didn't talk about it, would that problem get solved? But if everyone was talking about it, that's how it gets solved. So cultivating the ability to talk about it, mentioning it on social media, and most importantly to the youth. Out of the 10,000 teens and young adults that were surveyed in 10 countries, 75% of them believe the future is frightening. 75% of them. And you know why? Because they don't think we care or we're paying attention. And you know why? Because we're not talking about it. So figuring out how to talk about it. One of the best climate actions that you can take is listening to and mentoring a young person. I guarantee you there's some girl right now that is going to have some amazing invention in the future. She just needs some adults to say, you're smart and you should keep doing that. That's climate action right there. Practice listening and agreeing. What I mean by that is studies show that if you're trying to talk to people about any contentious issue, that if you disagree with them right off the bat, they will not listen to you. But if you agree with them, they stay open. An example is this. Hey, I'm not so sure about this climate thing. Aren't there natural cycles? The wrong way is to go, no, you're wrong. It's not natural cycles. The right thing to say is, you're absolutely right. There are natural cycles. And this isn't part of the natural cycle. Matter of fact, the reason we know about the natural cycles is because of why? Climate scientists. And those same people are the ones saying it's not that. So agreeing with people is really important. When someone says, aren't electric vehicles harder on the environment to produce? You're absolutely right. And once you drive them, they're cleaner. So I've been practicing this, and it's not as easy because we're all trained to fight right now. So practice listening and saying there is a bit of truth in everything that people are saying and thinking, in most cases. So find something to agree on to keep the conversation going. And connect with friends and family over it, like a diet, with self-referenced activity, not pointing fingers and lecturing. Okay, quiz results. You ready for the answers? We're going to skip the breakout. It's already 11:30. We'll just close it after this. Okay, so question number 1. Which category do you think has the largest representation of people in the most recent survey? Which of these 6 groups do more Americans find themselves in? And that is alarmed. The alarmed. The alarmed represent 33% of Americans. 1/3 of Americans. The concerned actually is 25%. So the majority of Americans, almost 2/3 of Americans, are either alarmed or concerned. As a percentage of people, what level do you think the dismissive reached? Because we're told by media, which has their own interests in sensationalism, partial information, keeping people combative. The percentage of people that are actually dismissive, 9%. Single digits. The reason this is important is it's intended to build your confidence to talk about it. Everyone is concerned and no one's talking about it. Only 9% are dismissive. So then question 3 has been answered. The alarmed is 33%. That's the largest. Matter of fact, each of those numbers could be directly correlated side by side, except for alarmed is 33, concerned is 25, cautious is 17, disengaged is 5, doubtful is 10, dismissive is 9. So question number 4, during the last few years, all of the categories shrank, but one of them almost doubled. That was alarmed. The last 5 years pushed a lot of people off the climate fence. It's one thing to talk about it and hear the threats and the doom and gloom. It's another thing to be living through it. And now people are on board. So all of them are shrinking, and alarmed is rapidly growing. Okay, so the idea here is know that we're all together on this. This isn't a partisan issue, and it's not something you need to be quiet about. Don't listen to the media. Talk to each other about this. Okay, the next question then. Question 5 on the back page. What % of Americans surveyed support climate policies like funding clean energy research, regulating carbon dioxide, solar and EV tax benefits, and teaching climate change in school? What level of American support do we have for that? 70 to 80%. Yeah, 70 to 80%. You're not really hearing about it. That's why I'm giving these talks, to say, hey, everybody. Question number 6. What % of American surveys say they discuss global warming at least occasionally? At least occasionally. 35%. 35%. I'll have my email up at the end here. If you would like attribution for any of this information, I'd be happy to send you links. This is from the Yale Climate Communication Survey. 35, that means that 2/3 of Americans don't talk about it. Well, if 35% of us are talking about it, then who are we talking to if the other 2/3 aren't? We're talking to ourselves. Seriously. That's why we need to practice talking about this, and not in a threatening, scary way. It takes practice, believe me. Question number 7, what percentage of Americans say that they hear about global warming at least once a week in the media? At least once a week in the media. How many Americans? 33%. 33%. Again, 2/3 of the people never hear about it. It never even registers for them. So again, the message here is the overwhelming majority of people are concerned. Overwhelming majorities support these policies, but no one's talking about it. The media is not talking about it. There was a study done. They looked at the last 5 years when people got on board with this and the calamities were growing. Over the last 5 years, they looked at every TV show script and film script that ever aired over the last 5 years. Something like 30,000 different scripts. They looked at when they mentioned climate change. Matter of fact, they were so desperate for mentions, they looked for adjacent mentions of solar. Did they talk about fracking? Anything? 2.8% of scripts mentioned it. So when we're absorbing media, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. What's that?
Wrap it up.
Okay. 5 more questions. So research links, I answered that one. 75% of youth around the world in 10 different countries, 75% think the future is frightening. That's our job to make sure that they get it, that we get it, and we're doing what we can. All right, the last 4 questions and I'm done. Politics, what % reduction is the goal for the country? That was in one of my charts, 50%. I talked about it. We need to be 50% below. And again, it's not a daunting number if you think of it as 7% a year over a decade. Question number 10, how close did that climate bill get us? Well, you remember the pie chart with the big gray slice not covered, that's about 1/3. So that bill gets us 65% of the way there. Close, close. They're getting us close and we appreciate what they're doing, but don't believe for a minute that they're ready and prepared to do what needs to happen at the scale and speed. That's what we're gonna do. Question number 11, every year there's the COP. They look at everyone's numbers. We made promises in 2015. In 2022, how many countries out of the almost 200 are actually on track to meet their goals? One country. It is such a small, weird country, I didn't commit it to memory. It was a country that I thought, I didn't even know that was a country. And I don't even remember, it was someplace in Africa, I believe. Was it Gambia? The Gambia, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's the one, you're right. So the Gambia, they're doing it. And then the last question, based on all the current global pledges to date, and honestly, I worded this incorrectly. What I wanted to say was under the current status quo, where would we end up? So there's kind of 2 correct answers to this. Under the current status quo, where we're headed is 2.7 degrees. But based on all the current global pledges and everything to date, it would get us to 2.1, which I didn't put in here. So if you circled 2 or 2.7, that's correct. So thank you so much for giving me so much of your time and attention. Woo. Yes. Oh. And I think I want to say thank you to Circle. Make sure that you visit their booth, Citizens Climate Lobby, Mind Watch, and Climate Action Now. Thank you to KNCO and NID. And then here is some of my contact info. My email is climatemartin. It's that easy, climatemartin@gmail.com. I've got daily news, weekly views, every other week radio, and a new monthly TV program. So please don't wait for someone else to do your part. Women are the solution to this problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you.